Welcome everybody to this celebration of and discussion of OutWrite, the speeches that shaped LGBTQ literary culture. You are in the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. I, along with my partner, Donnie Jokum, and we are the co-founders together of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, which we say is a government agency for a government that does not yet exist. And this is the service that we provide, holding this room for queer culture, literary, visual, and other. So thanks for coming out today. Thank you for those who donated online, and thank you all of you in cyberspace watching, assuming you're there. I did want to say that we are an all-volunteer organization. We have a suggested donation of $10. So if you can make a donation, we greatly appreciate it. There's change in here. But I always say if money is tight and you would like to buy a book or 2 or 3, you should hold on to your money and buy the books. So I'll pass that around. And if you're able to get something, thank you. And if not, just smile.
I'm going to do both.
What's that?
No one will see it.
Yeah, I can tell. Smile with your eyes. Exactly. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the register, and you will get an email every other Monday about our upcoming events. And we have many, many, many upcoming events in the next coming months. So we hope we'll see you here. Most of them are in person. A couple of them are online only. But now we've been streaming many of our events, which is one positive thing that came out of this charming pandemic. So we're happy about that. So I'm going to introduce Julie Enzor, and then we're going to jump right in. Is everything working fine?
Yes, if we could, I'm just going to ask too, I don't want to make it too awkward, but we have 5 folks online. And if we could just sort of talk this way and talk to whoever's out there. Okay.
Thank you. So Julie R. Enzor, PhD, is a scholar and a poet. Her book manuscript, A Fine Bind, is a history of lesbian feminist presses from 1969 until 2009. Enzor edits and publishes Sinister Wisdom, a multicultural lesbian literary and art journal, and is a regular book reviewer for The Rumpus and Calyx. Please welcome Julie Enzor.
Greg and Donnie for having us and for keeping this space. Queer bookstores are where so many vital things happen that keep queer culture alive. And so I thank you. I know it is a labor of love, and I appreciate all the work that you do for all of us on that path and for stocking Sinister Wisdom for so long. There are issues in the back that are out of print. So please buy them here today, as well as some of the other wonderful books lining these shelves. I'm just going to speak for a brief minute. Reggie Harris is really going to moderate this conversation today. We're going to each read from this wonderful book, OutWrite, the speeches that shaped LGBTQ literary culture, published by Rutgers University Press, and then have a little conversation about what the conference was that happened from 1990 until 1999. I'm especially thrilled to welcome a friend and compatriot in lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender literary culture, Reggie Harris, who attended one OutWrite. He's still trying to piece together which one it was. This may be because in addition to writers and editors and activists all gathering together, there was apparently some alcohol and drug usage that happened at the conferences. So that may be why Reggie cannot quite place the year. Oh, and there was, apparently, I was never at the conference and would know nothing about this, but apparently when queer writers got together, there was also a lot of sexual activity that happened in a variety of places. Craziness.
I never heard of it.
So when we set up this event, one of the things, because we're doing a series of events for the book, one of the things that has been a constant touchstone is the people who are not with us, and the people who are included in this book who are no longer able to celebrate this book with us. And 2 of the people who are most meaningful to me are Essex Hemphill and Melvin Dixon. We've had moving readings from their pieces. And when I knew we were going to do this event, I called Reggie in part because I feel like he is one of my contemporary Essex and Melvins, and I wanted him to be here to help celebrate this work. So Reggie is a noted and award-winning poet, most recently of autogeography, and we are thrilled to have him join us today. Reggie.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everybody. Hi. Drug use and sex, I don't believe that's what, you know, so what? You know, there was the night. It was wonderful. I want to start to give people a little bit of context about the book and about OutWrite, what it was, just by reading the first paragraph of Julie and Elena's introduction here. So between 1990 and 1999, 8 national OutWrite conferences convened, first in San Francisco, then in Boston. Initially, Outlook, the glossy national gay and lesbian magazine that published from 1988 until 1992, organized these gatherings of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer writers, editors, readers, and activists. Then when Outlook ceased, activists from the Bromfield Street Educational Foundation, better known for its leftist journal, Gay Community News, GCN, organized OutWrite. OutWrite played a crucial role in defining, expanding, and amplifying LGBTQ literary culture by bringing together many important LGBTQ writers of the 1990s in raucous events, highlighted by keynote addresses, plenary sessions, and workshops coupled with late night drinking, dancing, hookups, and other forms of literary revelry. The OutWrite conferences helped define a new queer literary canon and a movement of queer literary production. The speeches, arguments, and ideas in these conferences shaped and continue to shape indelibly the work of LGBTQ writers, and this history provides a touchstone for contemporary LGBTQ writers and activists imagining what the future might hold for our creative, literary, and artistic work. Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to be each reading about 5 minutes from the book, from some of the speeches from OutWrite. And that's why you're here. So I'll just get off the mic and introduce one of the co-editors of the book, Elena Gross.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am fresh as of last evening off of a plane from San Francisco, so I'm a little jet lagged. But I'm so happy to be here with you all and so happy to be in this space, which is my first time. And it's amazing to be standing up here in front of what feels like the product of exactly what we've been working on, all of this, the importance of queer literary production, and to be standing here with all of you, so that's great. I'm going to be reading from a speech that was a keynote address that was delivered in 1992 by the writer Dorothy Allison, who has long been a touchstone for my own work and an inspiration. And I found when we were working on this book, transcribing this speech in particular, that moments from this speech are what stick out to me the most. Now, months later after working on it, I come back to this particular speech and these couple of excerpts most often. So the title of the speech is Survival is the Least of My Desires. So this is the first passage that I'll read. The world is a new place, but it still needs to be remade. We still need revolutionaries. It was more than 10 years ago that the first person I knew personally died of AIDS. Last year, I lost 4 more friends, 4 more of the many who should not have died. This last year, my lover's ex-girlfriend turned up in jail after living on the streets for 2 years. My last aunt followed my mother into death by cancer, and I went through each day without health insurance, knowing that most likely I too will die of cancer before I am 16. Half of the people I know live without health insurance or the certainty of a living wage. The world needs to be remade. The brilliant, talented young gay men and lesbian writers in my life earn barely enough to pay their rent, much less by the time they need to write the books I want to read. We live, all of us, in the most impossible conflict, poor because of the work we choose to do, the lies we choose not to tell. Most of us know that sending applications to the National Endowment for the Arts or well-funded grants committees is like throwing a snowball into the sun. Our own organizations, our presses, magazines, bookstores, writing programs barely survive. Oh yes, the world needs to be remade. If we as writers are to continue, we need more people of large ambition, people who refuse censorship, denial, and hatred, people who still hope to change the world, writers who see themselves as revolutionaries, who turn up at demonstrations or envelope stuffing parties with the shadows under their eyes that prove how many nights they've gotten up after a limited sleep to hone their skills and dream on the page the remade world. I have lived my life in pursuit of the remade world. And now the second passage from that same speech. The worst thing done to us in the name of a civilized society is to label the truth of our lives material outside the legitimate subject matter of serious writers. We are not supposed to talk about our sexuality, not in any more than the most general and debased terms, our passions reduced to addictions or the subject of poorly thought out theories of deviance and compulsion, our legendary loving relationships written as the bland interactions of best friends or interlocking systems of dependence and necessary economic solutions. I need you to do more than survive. As writers, as revolutionaries, tell the truth, in your own way. Do not buy into their system of censorship, imagining that if you drop this character or hide that emotion, you can slide through their blockades. Do not eat your own heart out in the hope of pleasing them. The only hope you have, the only hope any of us has, is the remade life. It is the only way we will all survive, and trading any of us for some of us is no compromise. It is the way we will lose our lives, all our lives. The second worst thing done to us is a thing we do to each other. We ask each other to always represent our sexuality and relationships as simple, straightforward, and life-saving. We want to hear heroic stories, legends where the couples find each other in the end and go off into the sunset with the one distinction that they are the same gender, arm in arm, and lip-locked into the next dawn. We need our romances, yes, our happy endings, but don't gloss over the difficulties and rewrite the horrors. Don't make it easier than it is and soften the tragedies. Don't pretend we are not really murdered in the streets or broken in the darkened bedrooms of the American family. We need the truth. And yes, it is hard when fighting for your life and the lives of those you love to admit just how daunting that fight can be, to acknowledge how many of us are lost, how many destroyed, to pick apart the knots of fantasy and myth that blunt our imaginations and stalk our hopes for families in which we can trust each other in the future. But if I am to survive, I need to be able to trust your stories, to know that you will not lie even to comfort. I believe the secret in writing is that fiction never exceeds the reach of the writer's courage. The best fiction comes from the place where the terror hides, the edge of our worst stuff. I believe absolutely that if you do not break out in the sweat of fear when you write, then you have not gone far enough. And I know you can fake that courage when you don't think of yourself as courageous, because I have done it. I know that until I started pushing on my own fears, telling the stories that were hardest for me, writing about exactly the things I was most afraid of and unsure about, I wasn't writing worth a damn. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Next, we have Mariano Romo-Carmona, who lost custody of her son when she came out as a lesbian in 1975. She's a novelist and teaches at City College.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. I'm so glad to be here among books that are not my books on the shelves that are, I got teased, my wife of 38 years teased me because I printed stuff out, came out with paper instead of more convenient means, but it's her books and my books that line our shelves. So this feels like it is a luxury. So thank you for having them here. I was rereading the introduction, which is such a brilliant piece of scholarship, and it's something that should be read many more times. It's really, I turned around over here, a work of academic brilliance, what you did. So thank you so much. For me, reading it gave me this sparkly and very prickly feeling of being suddenly awakened in a dream by somebody whose face recognizes you all of a sudden. And I know that this is might not be a collective experience, and maybe it's just me, but it was that kind of understanding of all of us and being recognized, history and all, history and experience at the same time. And it's also because of the privilege of being alive and having been alive then, of course. But so it's only because it's of that, but also for the people who didn't attend the conferences or weren't young enough to have attended them, or for the younger ones who weren't born then, I hope that the gift of that scholarship is going to be with you for a long, long time, because it's that brilliant and necessary. So thank you. And I also thank them for the faithfulness and the objectivity that they did in representing that time and that particular intersection of history. My contribution then and now is about interstitial politics, the nexus of the activist, the cultural, and the academic fields, which it's something that I hadn't figured out then. But if you get stuck in an elevator with me, yeah, I'll be glad to tell you about it. So as a queer member of US Latinx populations, it was very difficult to explain that nexus and what was happening and where I was coming from. I came from New York City, Las Buenas Amigas lesbian group, Color Life magazine, and the People of Color Steering Committee, who initially met in this building until we decided to just go home and have snacks and other things. And we marched in Pride every year. But it was also very difficult to attend OutWrite and speak to the mainstream, because believe it or not, for us, OutWrite meant that it meant a mainstream to whom we needed to explain ourselves. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what that experience was like. And in fact, when I read the essay that I'm going to read a few paragraphs from in 1992 at the hotel, a dozen or so, probably maybe 18, 20 white men got up. I imagine white LGBTQ plus men got up and left in protest because of what I was reading. So you can imagine, that kind of disconnect that was happening. So I'll read a few paragraphs of that essay that I read. I realized today that I think of it more as a call out of all the issues that were important for BIPOC communities then, and that I tried to situate in a mesh of queer experience, queer artistic politics and living experience. For that essay, I researched the work of coalitions of indigenous collectives in the Americas and the work of Eduardo Galeano, which he himself had based on his reaction to racist assumption of Latin American colonial heritage. In 1992, Chile, my country of origin, was just emerging from 17 years of a dictatorship and chafed under the illegally established constitution upon the state, which today, after having won the plebiscite to rewrite that constitution by a constituent body whose chairperson, Elisa Loncon, is a Mapuche woman. So it's just, when I think about that, my consciousness kind of does flip-flops. And I said, am I really saying this? Did this really happen? So yeah, so Chile, along with Bolivia and Ecuador, is now a plurinational and intercultural state in which Native groups will be, are going to be respected to govern themselves. So, and I wonder again, did I just say that? Did that really happen? But I mean, we're here, so it happened. So what I'll do then is I'll just read a few paragraphs of that essay. History is never so important as when we don't have access to it. This is something of great value that we have learned as gay men and lesbians who carefully comb archives for evidence that we have existed, who write books and anthologies so that our lives will not be lost again. As part of the lesbian and gay community in the United States, we attempt to participate in its life, become part of its institutions, contribute to the development of its theory, literature, and politics. But very often we are rudely awakened to the fact that we are merely part of an endless panel exploring the wonderful diversity of our population. We find that our point of view is only accepted parenthetically to make note of how different our cultures are. Yet we still manage somehow to crawl out of El Barrio to find this place, the Lesbian and Gay Community Center. We are seen as newcomers, recently washed up on the gay and lesbian shore, not as people whose history is intrinsically part of the land we inhabit, but as a decoration, a piñata, or a little merengue. This is why I'm calling it a call out, because I was using these terms specifically to, provoke the reaction of discomfort that it wasn't all right, right? I then went to try to imagine, because what I was doing was I was researching, and as I said, the things that have happened just now, this year, and since the unrest of 2019 in Chile, that I can barely believe what it all has led to. At that time, I was trying to imagine and understand, as an immigrant and a person who was completely removed from her own heritage, and one who did not have a connection to her own indigenous background in her country of origin. So for me, it was all part of research that I needed to learn about and learn to respect. Imagine the year is 1540. In the 44 years since the discovery of the New World, very important events have taken place. Gold in incredible quantities of the purest grade has reached the coffers of Spain. The Aztec Empire has been brought to its knees. Elsewhere along the Antillean seas, once peaceful islands are engorged with the blood of several million indigenous peoples. In 1534, the port of Seville received the ransom for the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, whose life Francisco Pizarro promised he would spare. Atahualpa filled a room with gold and two with silver, but Pizarro, as we know, strangled Atahualpa and then decapitated him. Back to the call out. Chocolate has reached Europe. For the first time, perhaps, European nobility has experienced true sensual pleasure. And I'm laughing here, I'm thinking about Bridgerton and all that stuff. Tomatoes have reached Europe, and the world has witnessed the birth of cacciatore. That's what I'm imagining. In Guatemala, now Guatemala, the Quiché Empire has also been attacked by moving hordes of the Spanish crown's emissaries. Led by Pedro de Alvarado, they bring civilization, the word of God, empty galleons waiting to be filled with gold and silver, and smallpox, tetanus, typhoid, leprosy, trachoma, yellow fever, tooth decay, syphilis, and various other venereal, intestinal, and lung diseases, as well as horses and gunpowder. The great city of the Quiché, Utatlan, is burned down, and in front of the most important buildings, the Quiché kings and queens are immolated as a sign of complete defeat. Imagine being a survivor. Your entire world is destroyed. Your universe of knowledge is gone in flames with the leaders of your people. The libraries are burned. The history of your world is in those books. Your knowledge of the stars, of agriculture, of medicine, of mathematics, of architecture. They are burned along with your temples and your goddesses, your artwork and your sculptures. You are raped repeatedly by many foul-smelling men. Very commonly, an edict is issued by the arriving conqueror to assassinate not only the chiefs of a nation, but their descendants for 4 generations. When you are gone, you want your children and their children to know what has been passed on to you. You reconstruct history out of the ashes, the tale of the beginning of the world with all the teachings you can remember, which all the goddesses and gods whose names you still remember. The Popol Vuh. It is a sacred book. You hid it, you revere it and preserve it. When you are gone, your children continue to hide it and their children's children for nearly 150 years. By 1650, the Taino and Arawak were close to extinction. The continent of Abya Yala, 70 million people were reduced to 3.5 million. It is said that by 1600, the abuse and murder of indigenous peoples had been outlawed thanks to the efforts of notable men of the cloth, such as Bartolomé de las Casas. But in fact, it was sanctioned before each attack on the population. A wordy sentence was read. In fact, it was known as El Requerimiento. And it's a paragraph about this long, without translation, but in the presence of a notary public, because the Habsburgs were very good about keeping records. It stated that untold violence was about to befall people if they did not at once yield to the church and the crown, or if they maliciously delayed in doing so. By the end of the century, the entire wealth reaped from the invasion had been mismanaged and scattered, and the regime of the Habsburgs was bankrupt. But the European economy had been lifted out of the Dark Ages. Many translations and other celebrated books have been written based on the Popol Vuh. And it wasn't until 1927 that the book was published in Guatemala for the first time by Antonio Villacorta and Flavio Rodas. Today, the original translations can be found not in Guatemala, but in the Newberry Library in Chicago. Now, admittedly, I don't know since 1992 what has happened since, but at that time, at the time of that writing, that's what the fact was. Recovering the other heritage, the one that has been denied, means that we are willing to balance our skewed view of the world, and this takes effort. This is a time when the truth will be told with or without us. And we have to be committed to take part in the struggle. Civilizations have risen and fallen, and the world is still reluctant to respect basic human rights, even something so basic to human nature as sexual orientation. If we understand the importance of telling our history as lesbians and gay men, if what we are talking about here today is survival, then it has to be the survival of all of us. There were some other call outs, in particular, one to Joseph Beam's work, when I was talking about inclusiveness, and I'm hearing again Dorothy Allison's essay, which came right after this. I remember that we both talked about telling the truth. And in fact, I began this by saying, this is 1992, the year to tell the truth. So one thing that, referring to Beam, even though I didn't mention his name at that point, I said, inclusiveness does not mean setting up an award with the name of a deceased African-American, but then forget that there are countless African-Americans writing who are very much alive, who should have some say in the nomination process. So, I mean, most definitely, this was one of the burning issues of the time. So even though we were all there at OutWrite, or those of us who could be there, we were still working on all of these issues. There was nothing could be taken for granted. So it is time to tell the truth and figure out, I was referring to basically the funds that Dorothy Allison also referred to, the funds that writers need to continue their work. As writers, we have a choice to perpetuate the lies or tell the truth. The lies are composed of censorship, exclusion, deliberately twisting history to support the Eurocentric view. As people whose human rights are threatened, it behooves us to support, encourage, and protect in all ways the telling of the truth with the potential to liberate us all. By clinging to any part of oppression, we fracture ourselves. Any one of us who is interested in a hierarchy of oppression loses. We lose a part of ourselves because we cannot buy a little oppression with our discretionary income. We buy all of it. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I now would like to bring up the other co-editor of the book, Juliet.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Reggie. Thank you, everybody. I want to just, when I find it, bring Christos into the room a bit from the essay that she wrote. And also mention she and I have a little bit of a correspondence via snail mail, which some of you may remember by stamps. You put them on envelopes, you drop them into boxes. And so this is the primary way Christos likes to communicate, and I also love to communicate that way. And in talking with her, via letter, she has been talking about the genocide that is happening in the Ukraine, and the way that that feels so palpable to her as a Indigenous person in the Americas, and the genocide that has happened to her people. So I'm going to read from the end of her essay, The Gift of Open Sky, and it concludes with a poem. Christos said, this was in 1992, I believe, one of my particular jobs is to spread the word about Norma Jean Croy, a Native lesbian who remains incarcerated, though her brother has been freed on the grounds of self-defense in the same incident. This is a reflection of the fact that the prison business is blatantly sexist and racist, routinely forcing women and people of color to serve double and triple time compared to white males. I have petitions and a donation can to which I would appreciate your attention, she told the audience. Lest you think that I'm abusing the privilege of this speech by speaking of Norma Jean Croy, I'd like to remind you that she will not be on the 6 o'clock news or discussed in the New York Times, and so far has not been embraced by the media. Because she is invisible, because I have not done hard time, I need to bring her into our circle tonight. We note in a footnote that Norma Jean Croy was released on March 20th of 2005 after 19 years in prison, and that her release was largely due to activists in the United States, Canada, and Europe making her case on an international issue. Christos continued, I would like to close with a poem that I wrote for the place where I live, to give you the gift of open sky to carry you safely on your journey as writers. Before me, the land and water open. Their arms, tender sisters who have kept my place, watched each spray of racing birds, woven them into the still air for me to catch a shimmering glint. The blousy pine grows tall as the distant mountains we call home. Mischief of the eyes is sweet. Silver slate, the sound ruffles my hair. Roots I've packed for years settle in this meadow, delicate with brambles, broom, bright yellow suns I call beach daisies. These are the variations of green and gold I keep deep within my hands. These never same astounding clouds drift through my eyes in bleached conversation with strangers. These are the leaves and berries who marry me in delight. This is the earth I carry in a corn husk pouch against the brutal light of clapping hands. Here is the path choked with driftwood I trace to watch the sun go down over mountains whose wildflowers have caught and pressed my heart. Fly through these words, sharp as a deep and blue and rust swallow. That wavering branch is waiting for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And now Linda Villarosa, contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, whose forthcoming book is Under the Skin, The Hidden Toll of Racism on American Lives and on the Health of Our Nation. Linda?
I'm really grateful to be here with you and in this space. It's nice to be out again and in a special place. Hello to everyone out there. I really appreciate all of you and your contributions, my colleague here, who I haven't seen in so long. And thank you for your careful work on this book. I say that especially because when I read my piece, I realized that I had was super excited to be there and hadn't expected, to be asked. I was the keynote in 1995. And so my words aren't very coherent because I was on fire. So I appreciate your transcription. So in 1995, I was the executive editor of Essence magazine. And in 1992, I had come out with my mother on the pages of Essence. I wrote about coming out in college, and she wrote about how horrified she was by my coming out in college. And then the end was this nice coming together about our mother-daughter relationship. So the ironic part is now I'm at the New York Times Magazine, where we have been told, do not say you're an activist. Don't say that. You're not an activist, you're a journalist. I said it yesterday. I scolded someone. Stop saying I'm an activist. I'm trying to really be a journalist. The New York Times came out with a memo that said, calm down, reporters and editors on Twitter. So we're really not supposed to be doing that. But this speech in 1995 is called, We Have to Fight for Our Political Lives. The first line is, publishing and activism are the two areas in my life that have become critical. So clearly, I think I'm still like that, but I'm not saying it so much. So where I've been doing a lot of work and have been truly transforming for me, the larger theme I'd like to focus on is the desperate, very desperate needs to get our voices out. Because of the swing to the right, we have to keep talking and not allow ourselves to be silenced. We have to get our stories in print, no matter where, whether it's a magazine, a book, a newspaper, whether you're Xeroxing pages and stapling them together and handing them out somewhere, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, poetry. Our voices need to be heard to save our own lives and the lives of other people who are struggling and in pain. And the wonderful thing about us doing it as LGBTQ people is we can do it with true emotion, with style, and with beauty. One of the most rewarding things about my job at Essence is the very subversive ways that I am able to make change, even if it's baby steps toward change. My goal there as a staffer is to be able to be my true Black lesbian self, but also be able to change the way people think. And by people, I mean the 5 million readers that are available to me, but it's often a daunting task. The other part of my job is to roll up my sleeves with a group of other women editors, because we work in a collective way and slide in often radical politics around gender, sexuality, and even for Black magazine, race. Essence is the only large magazine for Black women, and we feel very responsible in a serious way to move the race forward. So between those hair and makeup tips, we try to offer very serious topics for discussions, like the bell curve, or prison reform, or environmental racism. We also run some very wonderful and I think subversive articles about LGBTQ issues. Okay, so then I showed this. It's gonna seem so dated. Okay, this is our Whitney and Bobby cover. which is, you know, we don't have to say it out loud, problematic on a number of levels. And may Whitney rest in peace. But in it, I was really proud to get an excerpt of Elin Harris's second book, Just As I Am, and to have it in the context of reads about romances. When readers open up the magazine without any explanation, just as a natural theme, they saw a gay male love story. I really, really treasure that. Okay, here we go, here's another one. This is our Halle Berry cover. And it's really funny, if you recently saw the podcast, the National Geographic podcast about the woman diver who was going underwater to discover in the slave shipwrecks. She used to be the last virgin. She switched over and now she's a scuba diver. Many of us can have second acts. All right. Then in our June issue of last year, we had this cover of Halle Berry. We also had an article by Nadine Smith called Homophobia, Will It Divide Us? It was a very serious discussion in honor of the March on Washington, the gay games, and LGBTQ issues. I am very proud we got that in. In an upcoming issue in June, we're having a piece about fathers raising their children, and we have, without any great fanfare, an article about a gay man who's raising his son. That's the work I'm most proud of, to explain LGBT issues to a mainstream heterosexual Black audience, and also introduce our readers to some really gifted writers who they may not know. And that's my day job. No, here I go talking about activism. Also, I have this other thing that's happened to me, and it's around activism, which is at least part as important as the other work I do at the magazine. First, I would like to give praise to the people who did it before me and who have done it longer than me and who have done it really wonderfully and influenced what I'm doing now. When I wrote my coming out article with my mother 4 years ago, I had absolutely no idea I would be thrust into the limelight the way I have been. That article was the most responded to for at least a decade, if longer, in the history of the magazine. I had no idea what the real demand and true hunger for a visible symbol of Black lesbianism. Being that visible symbol has been utterly consuming. As a writer, and even more behind the scenes as an editor, I had no idea what it would be like. I've had some frankly shocking experiences along the way in those 4 years. One thing I've learned is that it's critical that we as writers use our skill and our positions as members of the out community to make the link between other oppressed communities and the LGBT community. And that is a difficult, frustrating, and also painful experience. I'm gonna speak about it mostly from the standpoint of the Black community. And as we know, the right wing is out to get us, all of us, regardless of race, gender, sexuality. And we really have to understand the intersections and drive it home as writers. We have to stop being good little boys and girls and saying, please, please give us a place at the table. We have to question who's on the invite list. If we're gonna go to that table, we need to say, I'm gonna bring a few uninvited guests to the party. And this is often hard because we've been suckered into believing that equality is a scarce commodity, this little pie, the tiniest dessert at the dinner table, and that there's only a limited amount and not everyone can have some, and there's not enough to go around. There's equality for women, there's equality for queer people, there's equality for Black people. So if one group gets some, then another group can't have any. And as the saying goes, some people like me are all those things, Black, queer, and woman, which means that some of us must be brave. Sometimes being brave doesn't work, but sometimes it does. A few weeks ago, I was invited to the University of Cincinnati to speak to a student group. Before I got there, the group called me and in a very, very casual way say, oh, by the way, you're gonna have 6 bodyguards there because, you know, there's been a death threat from the Klan. So I was like, oh, okay. Bodyguard, okay. I tried not to panic. I called a lot of activists that I knew, from Sarah Schulman to Mandy Carter to the Klan Watch to Black student groups on campus to local politicians. I was hysterical, telling everybody, asking, what should I do? What should I do? Should I cancel? So the word really got out. I got on the radio and the student group was like, you know, maybe you shouldn't talk about this so much. But I was like, you know, the Klan has threatened us. I was really open about it. So when I got to the actual event, it was packed. and it was bad. People really showed up, including the white supremacists. And I was really impressed by those bodyguards too. There was a group of Black people sitting kind of segregated at the mostly white lesbian and gay activists who were the organizers. And just a side note, I didn't write this in the essay, the Black bodyguards were all these Black women wearing leather. And so, you know, having them stand behind me, I'm kind of nerdy. So I was thinking, this is the coolest thing. And they were mad. And they were sort of like, don't you touch her. But what I saw was everyone in the room together. The Black, mostly straight people, the bodyguards, and then the white activists. And the white activists had been organizing around some anti-gay legislation in Cincinnati. So anyway, the evening went fine. When I called to check in on them, the groups had made pacts between themselves. The lesbian and gay group made a pact that next Christmas, when the Klan raises its stupid cross in the town square in Cincinnati, the white, gay, and lesbian activists were going to come and support the Black people who were there year after year. The next week at the meeting of the LGBT group, those Black people who were sitting right there because they understood, don't let the Klan mess with anybody. Because it was such a dramatic event, I was able to easily make the link. The Klan is usually out trying to lynch Black people, and here they are in an LGBTQ space. Lynch was the word they used to lynch lesbian and gay people. You can see that link. It was clear. I didn't have to keep driving it home. People understood. And just saying, not all the work has to be done by those of us who are Black, lesbian, and gay people. Today, I really want to challenge white queer people to do some long-range thinking about this. I know some of it's happening, but it's worth it to drive it home further and to really push harder on this, to really begin to do more and use different strategies to forge ties with communities of color.
Thank you. I think we're going to jump right to the Q&A, and now I've got to try to adjust this. Well, I'll wait for the experts to take this off and to adjust the screen as well. All right, thank you. And I wanted to start with Elena and Julie and ask, what was the impetus behind pulling this book together? Why did you decide to do this?
So the story about, I guess, how all of this came together in, I think it was 2017, one of the previous founders of Outlook magazine, E.G. Crichton, was working on a large scale project with the GLBT History Museum in San Francisco, in which she was inviting artists, writers, activists, scholars to she was basically matchmaking each one of us with an archival issue of Outlook magazine. And we were tasked with responding to the magazine in any form or fashion we chose. Anything within the 50 or so pages within our issue, we were able to basically use our own talents to basically reinterpret or reimagine or respond to. So in the issue that I received, what I decided to kind of respond to in a long form essay was ads for the original OutWrite 1990 conference. Basically, through that, I did a lot of research on who were the keynote speakers, and I was just kind of amazed that this entire conference had taken place and I had never heard of it. No one had ever talked to me about it. It's not something that seemed to be, and everyone I talked to as I was working on the essay hadn't heard of it either. And so basically I wrote this essay kind of questioning why that was, but then also really kind of reveling in what I imagined the room must have been like, what that experience must have been like for everyone to kind of come together in 1990 at this moment in time around the written word, around queer literary production, and to really, again, to revel in it. And so I presented that essay at the Queer History Conference in 2019 at San Francisco State. And as I'm reading, in the audience is Julie Enzor, who I like to think whose eyes were like sparkling and staring up at me. And so after the panel was over, she came up and, introduced herself and said, I've been thinking about OutWrite for a while. I have all of these tapes from some of the conferences. I think this could really be a book. And I was just sort of like, okay, sure, see you around. And went, about my business at the conference. But then a few weeks later, I get this call on the phone, and Julie's like, no, really, I think this could be a book. And would you want to work on this project with me? And I was like, yeah, sure, I guess so. And that just began, the then 2-year-long exploration of finding speeches online and archives and papers, the audio tapes, Northeastern University, and compiling this book that we now have in front of us.
Thank you. Julie, did you want to add anything?
No, I'll just say that that's my usual experience. Like I talk to people, I say, "Oh no, this would be a really great idea," and they're like, "Okay," and then there's a call a couple weeks later, and they're like, "Oh really?" So yeah, other questions.
Okay. And I wanted to ask those who were there what memories they have, or whether there's anything in particular that they wanted to bring back. One thing I remember, actually, we had a people of color conclave, I guess, if you will, or gathering. And there was this one white reporter who refused to leave. We asked him to leave. And so there was a lot of time taken up with the fact, well, should he be here? Is his presence going to distort the conversation at all, or something like that? So there was all this time taken up talking about this white person, which was unfortunate. And the other thing I remember is Chip Delaney. So therefore, it must have been the year that he did the keynote. But in any case, Chip Delaney, I'm in the elevator with a bunch of my friends, and John Keane was there, and James O'Hardy was there, and one of John's friends who is a cartoonist were there, and we're all in the elevator together. And I, in those days, was a little bit slimmer and also more adventurous than possibly I should have been in trying to stuff myself into black jeans. And so I dash off the elevator, and there's Chip Delaney behind me saying, "I'd follow that ass anyway." It's my favorite memory. This is my only claim to fame.
That's wonderful. I wanted to say that I remember being in those caucus groups, and staying up all night writing up resolutions, as you have to do that so that you can present resolutions somewhere. I remember Melvin Dixon's speech, and I hear the rhythm of his speech. I'll be somewhere listening for my name. It's just that never, the cadence of his voice just never ever left me. I remember Chip Delaney. I remember, and I wish I had brought the T-shirt, but I remember from one of the conferences. I remember Alison Bechdel asking a question of older lesbians, and I thought that was really cute. But there was so many. I think that the best times were those, besides the workshops and listening to each other, it had to do with those times when we actually tried to get something concrete done, setting it down on paper, staying up all night, working on something, and the strength that came from that.
What I remember is I was really surprised to be asked, because I thought of myself more as an editor than a writer at that time. And I called Sarah Schulman and I was like, should I do this? You know, this is very important. You have to do this together. I will help you with your speech. And then I found out that there were two keynotes, me and Tony Kushner. So then I called her again. Who did I? But I think it was in Boston my year, I think. And I just remember it was really crowded, probably because of Tony Kushner, but some people came for me too. And it was terrifying. But I can tell by my speech that I was on fire. So I remember it being fun. And I do remember some of those, you know, the parts that were the best were the caucuses where we were getting together and being mad about things.
Yeah.
I will add, there was a lot of talking back during your speech, because we listened to this transcript a number of times, and it was both, like, one of the things of listening to the transcripts is there was both the talking back of support, kind of the call and response, and there was also the heckling, right? Of, like, I think you characterized a white gay male writer as, well, let's just say you characterized him as not one of your people. And there were some hisses and some boos, which characterized a lot of the speeches and the talking back and stuff that happened. And the other thing I just want to add personally, Linda, one is I can hear Sarah Schulman when you called her. I can hear that in my mind, and that's beautiful. But two, I was running the Gay and Lesbian Community Center in Detroit while you were the editor of Essence. And so when you were showing the covers of the magazine, your editorship was so influential to so many men and women in the African American community in Detroit, and so transformative for what you did, that I think so much of the world that we're living in today has roots in that work that you did. So I hope you recognize that and hold on to it, because it changed people's lives.
We have some time for questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, wants to ask.
Or boo or hiss.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Let's see that out.
I wish I still had it. Yeah.
We do have a question from Ann Charles online. Bravo to all. Who are your literary activist influences?
That's a good question.
I would say easily Audre Lorde. And also someone recently asked me if I had known Jim Jordan. And so I love her work. I felt really close to it, but she was, when I was at Essence, she was, I'd say, much more progressive than me. And so we would get in arguments about stuff. She was really scoldy to me. She's like, you're too conservative, too. So it's funny to have, you know, that was my experience with her. And I often think, oh, I was such a jerk then. And then I'm like, no, I wasn't. I was just myself. And I was able to push back against this really big brained, passionate person.
I mean, I think for me, it's cheating, because being of a younger generation, it's the people in this book. And that was what was so exciting about working on it, was seeing and working on and finding out more about the conferences and seeing Sarah Schulman's name, seeing Essex Hemphill's name, seeing Linda Villarosa, like seeing all of these people, you know, Dorothy Allison, you know, all of these people who I'd been reading about in these other capacities through school or through professional work, and then getting a chance to imagine what it would be like to sit in front of them and listen to them speak passionately at a time that I'm definitely the beneficiary of. Like, so much of the activism that you all did during that time, all of the work that you have produced, I'm here because of. So yeah, I think it's cheating asking me. I'm very curious to hear what everybody else would have to say because it's all of you.
Me? Oh, okay.
Other than Chip Delaney.
Other than Chip, who is really a remarkable, influence on me in so many ways. His work is just so astonishing. I think it would probably be Essex Hemphill. I was fortunate enough to see him in Washington, D.C., reading at the Kaffa House, which is RIP, no longer there. And also being part of that. There was an amazing group of a salon, if you will, in Washington at that time of Black gay writers and others who came and who, talked and argued and, plotted and planned. And it was great to be sort of even tangentially part of that. It was sort of it was a vision. It was sort of like a vision of this is a possibility. And we realized then that we were, in a sense, the second Harlem Renaissance, if you will. I mean, it really felt like that. It really felt like we were changing the world. And I guess considering what we're surrounded by and, who we're surrounded by, that in some ways we did, so.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's wonderful to be able to say this. I wanted to say Bert Hunter and Colin Robinson. Bert especially because he had so much love, and talking with him, he calmed everybody down, and he just had so much love and acceptance for all of our frailties, and we all have them. So especially because of that. And I wanted to say Barbara Smith and Audre Lorde for a couple of different things. Barbara Smith, because when we both lived in Boston at the same time, in the Boston area, I remember her standing up at tirelessly. She took books everywhere. She stood up at every single meeting and held up a copy of Conditions 5, the Black women's issue, and told you this, it costs $3. You can subscribe, I think it was $6 a year or something like that, but this issue costs $3. And of course, you all know this issue, right? And everybody was like, yes, we know that issue. Or another book that but some of us are brave. Homegirls, she just never stopped, and that just knowing that she was there doing that work was what kept you going, because you knew that someone like her was going to be there. She was going to have your back. And Audre, because she drove like a maniac, and when you got in her car and she went tearing down the FDR, she would say, if it looks like I'm driven, it's because I am. And I'm so that's a seatbelt. And can I just give a shout out to Joan Larkin, because as a poet, I would hear your voice saying, so thank you, Joan, for your faith and what people were doing in poetry, and the healing power and the raw power of poetry, but the power of excellence. I remember one thing that you said when you heard somebody reading, and you close your eyes and you said, this is not a line. And your criticism and your very clear criticism of that line, and it respected the craft. And you had to take notice. And your faith and your conviction behind that teaching and behind that work is a gift. Thank you.
So I wasn't going to share this, but it was triggered when Linda talked about the relationship with June Jordan, you said about Joan about criticism, and she held her head. When we did, so I felt as a younger person when I was first editing Sinister Wisdom like that, I've been scolded by like the best lesbian feminists, right? Like, and I felt like every issue that came out, you know, somebody would like email with their critique of what was wrong, and I thought to myself, I'm never going to do this. And then Elena and I were doing the interview with the Poetry Foundation, where they have the clip, if you haven't listened, of Melvin Dixon singing, and I keep meaning to put Melvin's whole speech online. It's coming, but it's beautiful. But at one point during that interview, the interviewer asked us a question, and I responded scoldingly back. She asked about our relationship together and sort of us being of different generations, and I was like, do not put us into a conventional heterosexual family. That's not how I think about things. And I like did this whole scolding moment, and I sat back after when we were all done, and I said, I have become what I said I never would. So things come and go around. So I echo a lot of this, but I also wanted to add the names of people who inspire me. Cheryl Clark, who has been such a supporter of so much of my work and is in this volume, and also in this volume, Judy Grahn, who I think continues to produce and to think and to press all of us in the community in ways that I find very meaningful.
Yes, John.
Well, it was striking me listening to all of you, and thank you for this fabulous presentation, that this was a period when we were still going through the trauma of the AIDS epidemic. And it never even occurred to me until I heard you speaking tonight that, and this is a question, but I'll get there, that there was real parity. Male and female, gay and lesbian, and it seemed like everybody was interested in what everybody else was doing, whether as critic or appreciator. And I don't know when that all began. I mean, it seems to me that's very different from what was going on in the 80s, that our communities were more separate. And I wondered if anybody had any comments or insights about that, as relates to the conference.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that when Outlook was publishing, central to Outlook's mission was gender parity. And that was one of the first things, and people in the oral histories of Outlook have talked about that the magazine they worked really hard to make a balance between men and women. And Judy references it mildly in her speech, but also talks about the first conference in 1990 as a real coming together of communities that had organized separately, gay men and lesbians, and that were coming together. And all of the organizing committees had gender parity for all of the panels. Now, there were people, I was just reading Feminist Bookstore News, there were people, some lesbian feminists were complaining about this, right? Because it meant that the conference couldn't be a space to really excavate specific lesbian concerns, because all the panels had to be half women and half men. People were thinking about gender at this time, but in different ways than we think about it now, because I think most queer conferences now would not describe panels as half women or half men. And the other thing that Michael Bronski talks a lot about as well is really thinking about the racial ethnic diversity that went not only into the keynote speeches, which this book is primarily of, but also all of the other panels and everything. So that was it was a conscious decision and something that people worked on that I think sometimes we do forget.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add to that I think this comes through subtly in the speeches themselves, but in the first plenary in 1990, I think there's a video on YouTube that you can watch of it, but also reading the speeches themselves, you can see that there's a tension that I think that exact project of trying to maintain a gender balance, of trying to find a racial and ethnic balance, while of course was a very utopic idea, but there was still at a time when that was still kind of contentious in certain ways. And it comes through in the work, it comes through in Essex's speech, as he calls out Mapplethorpe, and you can hear the audience kind of hiss and boo and, kind of be upset, but then you can hear from Sarah's point of view of her like trying to take, her and Judy Grahn also kind of thinking about, or Judy Grahn's like real like call for like the merging of gay men and lesbians to work together, and really like kind of calling for that. So like you can hear that contention and that struggle that was pervasive at the time period in the actual speeches themselves, and feel that kind of in the room, which is and so it's great that they, even with that, that was still the mission throughout, like that they maintained it throughout the history of the conference, as opposed to saying, oh, well, this looks like it's maybe not going so well. And therefore you do start to see the benefits of it. You start to see how it starts to work, even as points of tension arise.
I really appreciate your pointing that out, because I remember a lot, so much was separate. If there was a queer gathering, it would be the men do this, the women do this. And I remember that it was in maybe sometime before OutWrite, but after 1990, it was in the early 90s. And I had written a piece in essence about HIV/AIDS. It was still called GRID. So a lot of people, in the community knew I knew about it. And then I remember, and then I had come out in the magazine and I got invited, I think it was here, to other countries. So other countries was sort of like when you were talking about the DC group, was the New York Black queer men. And I was struck, they were trying to they had one book, one anthology, and I think they were trying to put another together, or maybe it was the initial anthology. And they invited me to come help with the editing. And I remember thinking how heroic they were, because they were all fighting HIV/AIDS, because it was in about probably 1993. And I just thought, my God, I hope this book gets out there.
Oh,
Thank you so much for all these wonderful tidbits, and also for talking about the conflicts, because I think we're richer for them. And I don't mean they're over, but I had a process, Julie, part of your wonderful thesis that you did, but also I know Mariana from years in New York, and being part of the transition team of Kitchen Table, and honored to be even asked, as a white person. But I just want to say that in the at OutWrite, the lesbian publishers, and this is, it's part of the same line, were really at the forefront. And I'm sorry to say that many of the white men were like, well, are we going to be mainstream? Can we get a contract with St. Martin's? I mean, you did. Can I do that? It was like that. And then other people like Asoto Saints, forming Galleons. He was like, I need to learn from Barbara Smith. He was he knew what was happening. And it took a while for others to get on board, to understand what it means to make your own, to stake a place, to show up with the book, Homegirls, this, conditions, this, $3, get it, all that. And I know she took books in her suitcase every time. And I also remember her saying, Audrey doesn't take books. Audrey just goes. I take books. But Audrey had another trunk. All right.
She was driving fast.
Right. She was a special delivery. Yeah. All right. So anyway, just that feeling of coming from the ground as the dykes on the job kind of was a very real thing. And then there was also, with all of the women's health activism around cancer, pre-AIDS, that was a whole movement. So when this started happening to our gay brothers and others, we knew some stuff to pass on. And yes, there were some people who were like, nah, never mind, I'm not getting into that. But it just got bigger and bigger. So a book like Rebecca Brown's Gifts of the Body, which I was telling this fine gents back here about, which is about the caretaking community around AIDS, bring stories about that community. It's a great book, and I use it in teaching to this day, and people are like, oh, I didn't know about that. I said, you start with this, and then you read, you know. And so anyway, something about the context of the growing beautiful friendships and crossovers, you know, that happened, and the conflicts that were right there. I remember your talk, and I remember people walking out. Yeah, that rings a bell, and also about the Joe being. I think what we did was make a petition, but anyway, things have changed and not changed.
So I think we should wrap up. Thank you all very much. Please, I encourage you to buy OutWrite, of course, but if OutWrite doesn't float your boat, please buy another book to support the bookstore. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I know.
Goodbye, TV audience.
We'll get chairs.